Yeah. All right. Welcome, everybody. Over to you, Rachel.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Rachel, the Parkinson's nurse up in the Hastings Macleay. For those I haven't met, I've been here for about 3 years, and it's as like Nina and Vince, it's a pretty full and busy job. But anyway, very enjoyable. So, right. Oh, I don't know how. Okay, so I think we had a little DBS meeting before, so you know that the area that I cover. We've probably, I think from my last records, I think we've probably got about 15 people here in this area that have deep brain stimulation, and most of those patients have it for Parkinson's, but there's also a couple that actually have it for other reasons. We're talking about advanced therapies. We've got about 5 people now that are on duodopa therapy, and there's 3 people having apomorphine therapy. And one of those or 2 of those people are actually having apomorphine therapy as a bridging therapy for their deep brain stimulation, which is being scheduled for them sometime this year. Not sure with the pandemic and some elective surgery being bumped back. So the question, I know that you're all mute, so you can sort of do fingers. Who's got deep brain stimulation already?
I have.
You can see these guys, yeah.
Yep.
Hands, yeah. Who's considering deep brain stimulation? Anybody online, Morel, you can see? And is there anybody being worked up for deep brain stimulation? Because we can have a chat about that as well. And anybody that's got DBS, which is not actually for Parkinson's, but for another reason like essential tremor. There's some questions to consider. So you've probably seen these images all through the internet. So deep brain stimulation is like a pacemaker of the brain. It has a pulse generator, a battery down here, and that goes up via a lead and then in via electrode usually into what we call the subthalamic nucleus. Most patients I've met have their electrodes inserted into this subthalamic nucleus. I've met one person that had it inserted into the globus pallidus, and that was for orthostatic hypertension. I guess I wanted to really mainly talk about a study that I had to do when I was at university last year. And it wasn't so much about the efficacy of deep brain stimulation, but I was really interested in looking at some qualitative studies about how people worked up for DBS and what their experiences were. And I actually found one step further, and that was actually about the spouse of a person living with someone who's working up through DBS, and then what their experiences were for the year post that DBS. The interesting thing I thought was that the authors of this research were actually nurses, and they were professors as well at a place called Aarhus University in Denmark. And the significant thing about that is that I went to Aarhus once and I first saw my first Barbie that was pregnant, and you could open up the Barbie doll and pull out the fetus and then pop it back in again. But that was pretty amazing place, Aarhus. So when we're looking at research, I guess the research studies are always about to look for gaps in our knowledge. And we know that there is so much data and statistical data on how DBS provides improvements in people's mobility, their reductions in their off and on medications, and how that can contribute to their quality of life. There's lots of other studies that I looked out at, and that was how people adjusted to their diagnosis and to their Parkinson's disease illness, how that illness really does involve families and how families are affected. And also there was a lot of studies about the changes that spouses experienced following a diagnosis of Parkinson's and then the progressive illness. But this study was about, it was a qualitative study, and the aim was to actually explore the lived experiences of a spouse to the person with advanced Parkinson's, so before and during the first year of DBS. There was 10 spouses involved. The dates were from 2007 and to 2008. And the data was collected mostly by interviews, which is how they got their qualitative study. And the idea was that they would explore themes around the lived experiences of these partners. So the year before, the themes that they came up with were things like living in a partnership. And so that was about the spouses experiencing also a sense of loss on the diagnosis of Parkinson's. And I hear, a lot of people that I've met, it's really fortunate that I have a lot to do with the carer support group here in Port Macquarie. And there's a sort of a sense sometimes of saying, well, I didn't actually sign up for this, but it's really important that we still maintain our partnership. So the theme of being available to your partner. So these partners always made sure that they were either physically nearby or able to help physically. And if they weren't, that they'd always have a backup plan for someone to, assist their partner. They lived with the illness as well. So they had a pretty intimate knowledge of their partner's body. They lived actively, but they felt restricted. So for instance, an example was that if they went to a party and the person with Parkinson's had to leave because they had cramps or their medication had worn off, they would also have to leave with the partner. They said they wouldn't send them home in a cab. And also being strong for two people. So that was another theme that came out of their interviews, that they needed to be strong for both of them, but they also felt that they should have a space of their own. So that gave them some capacity to actually cope with all the everyday strains of dealing with Parkinson's and some of the challenges of that. So they were the themes that these researchers found beforehand. And then they interviewed these people again, the 10 spouses, and I think they had a fairly good compliant. People stayed on and didn't leave the study. So from the themes that they got from the interviews from the first year, they noticed that there was much more spontaneity in their lives of people with the spouses. They also said that the spouse's experience of life changed following DBS, and this was really closely related to whether the DBS was experienced as a success or not. So that was very important too, that it should be successful. They talked about a sense of freedom and embracing life. So they could feel that they could be a bit more spontaneous. And one of the interesting things was that they felt free from having to worry about whether people's medications were going to work or not. And I thought that was pretty significant, that change in their experience. They had a life without worry. They didn't feel so much guilt, or they didn't have to worry about their spouse so much because they were getting good therapy from their DBS and were able to be a bit, more independent and have an improved quality of life. And they also talked about being a promoter of change. So if before the DBS, they were used to doing sort of all sorts of physical things for their partner, they would say to the person, if you just said, could you get that for me? And they'd say, well, actually, you've got a good on response now. So now it's your turn to go and pick up those things or do those things. So, so that was just it was just an interesting study to review and to see something a little different just from just the pure efficacy of Parkinson's and DBS. So food for thought, Morel.
Absolutely, Rachel. That slide that you just shared, the themes in the first year, the resonated was, how to change the dialogue.
Yeah.
So to then communicate differently so that you're everybody's able to make choices because you've been given the opportunity to take back the control a little.
Yeah.
Totally.
And that it was such a partnership decision as well, I think, too.
Absolutely. And there's quite a few joining us today that have joined with their partner. So
yeah,
it's great for quick Q&A.
Yeah. So really, it was just to give you this qualitative study and just really talk about how these things may have been a part of people's lives with DBS or consideration if they're looking at going on to DBS.